Soil is complicated, but if there's just one thing to know to help understand how water moves through the ground, it's your soil's textures. Texture, the balance of sand, silt, and clay, affects lots of soil properties, including water storage. Here, we'll identify your soil texture. There are three main ways. Dig a hole and feel it with your hand. Send samples to a lab. And the fastest and easiest way, look up soil surveys for your farm. Here's a chart with all the different names of soil textures and how they're defined by the proportion of sand, silt, and clay. Sandy loam is the most common texture across BC's Kootenay and Boundary regions, with roughly 60% sand, 30% silt, and 10% clay. Some areas have more silt, also called rock dust. It's just extremely fine sand. A few areas have lots of clay, which is made up of slippery, microscopic plates with special properties that make it very different from silt. Soils can change quickly from one spot to another, and soils also change in layers below the surface. As farmers, it's really important we become familiar with how soils vary across our fields and through these different layers. How deep is it important to look? If you only grow shallow-rooted crops, then maybe only the top layers concern you. But farms with deeply rooted crops should know their soils to a depth of 4 feet, and every farm should have a rough idea of what's deeper, since that affects drainage. The best way to experience your soils is to dig holes all over and take a look. It's usually easy to pick out different layers as the colors and textures change. For each layer, grab a handful of soil, add some water, and knead it into a ball. You can learn a lot about the soil texture from how it cracks, or doesn't, when you squeeze that ball, or roll it into a snake, or bend it into a fat horseshoe, or a skinny ring. Look up your observations in a chart to figure out what texture you're working with. And be sure to take notes and photos to remember where you dug, how deep the layers were, and what you saw. You should also estimate the volume of the soil that is gravel or rock. Use a sieve to remove everything bigger than 2 millimeters. We don't include these coarse fragments in handfeel tests, and coarse fragments also reduce the amount of water the soil can store. If you're keen, you could send a couple samples to a lab to get a texture analysis for about $20 per sample. Keep a bag of the sampled soil for yourself. When the results come back, try the handfeel test again to calibrate yourself. It's like looking up the answers in the back of the book. By far the fastest and easiest way to learn about your soils is to spend a few minutes with the Soil Information Finder tool, or SIFT, and take advantage of the decades that scientists have toiled over BC's soil surveys. It takes no time at all to find your soil in SIFT. First, click on the Soil Survey tab. Now zoom in on your farm. Here's a property near Cranbrook. All the yellow lines are borders between soil types. These boundaries are just estimates, so take the map with a grain of salt. Click on the shape that overlaps the field you are interested in, and information pops up. This soil is called Glencairn. 100% means it's the only soil type in this shape. Other soil survey shapes may have a mixture of 2 or 3 soil types, each listed along with the percentage of land it occupies within the shape. Glencairn's texture is listed as sandy loam, but that's just the surface layer. For irrigation, we have to go below the surface and find the textures of all the deeper layers. Scroll down and you'll find a couple useful links. Beside Soil Survey Description, click More Info to get the original survey report. It's dense with details on where and how the soil was formed and what naturally grows in it. Today we're after the other link, Soil Name and Layer Description. It sends you to a summary of the soil's properties. First, see if there are root-restricting layers. Your crop's roots may bottom out on these hardpans, and they likely affect drainage too. Then, to identify your soil's layers and textures, we'll need this confusing table. You can ignore most of it, so let's sort out what you need. Each row in the table is a layer of soil, with the upper and lower depths of the layer listed in centimeters. Slide over to T sand, T silt, and T clay, the percentages of sand, silt, and clay in each layer. Here, in the top 45 centimeters, or 18 inches, this soil is very consistent with 65% sand, 25% silt, and 10% clay. Below 45 centimeters, it turns to 90% sand. We use these percentages of sand, silt, and clay to identify the soil texture on the triangular chart we saw earlier. You might find it easier to use an online soil texture calculator. I quite like the USDA's version. Punch in the percentage of sand and clay, 65% sand and 10% clay, and it tells you the texture, sandy loam, and puts a dot on the chart. Let's put another dot on the chart for the deeper soil layer. 90% sand, 5% clay. No surprise, it's sand. There's one more thing to consider, especially for all of us rock farmers here in BC's Kootenay and Boundary regions. Anything wider than 2 millimeters is no longer sand, but is instead a coarse fragment. Small coarse fragments hold very little water, and larger gravel and rocks hold almost no water at all. Back in the soil survey table, look up CoFrag, and we see that coarse fragments make up about 40% of the Glencairn soil in the top 20 centimeters, or 8 inches. Below 20 centimeters, that jumps up to 70%. Ouch! That's really going to hurt the soil's capacity to store water, which we'll calculate in the next video.